Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Canucks Conversation presented by the great folks at Zephyr Epic. Be sure to use our promo code Hockey Season, capital H, capital S, all one word, Hockey Season. That'll get you $5 more order at ZephyrEpic.com and free shipping on orders of $50. That's on me. I did not mute the YouTube chat there. I was about to yell at Aaron, but I'll take that one myself. That's my bad. Here we go. From the top. I don't do this often, but I think that was a pretty good intro. Joining me in studio here as David Quadrelli, the normal intro guy, is on vacation. Harman Dayal. Harm, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. I'm jacked up, got Canucks news, and I'll say I'm impressed by how you powered through that intro without skipping up because it wasn't just the intro music playing again, but man, at least in my ears, it was really, really loud.
Yes.
And so good on you, man, overcoming the mistake.
You know how many mistakes we've made in the time of doing this show? There's a lot of mistakes through and through. Not only just on the YouTube stuff, the podcast, everything. That's
just like
why
the Canucks.
We live
at this point, they just they've made a lot of mistakes, but look, just gotta move on, overcome it, get back on track.
And that's the thing. I feel like we're going to have a good show. We've made some mistakes in the past. The Canucks have made some mistakes in the past. I think they made a pretty damn good signing today. We're all in the same boat here. This is the Canucks Conversation. My name's Chris Faber. Our producer, Aaron Bordato. Aaron, we don't ever ask you off the top, how are you doing at the start of the episodes? We never know. Are you like screwing around with graphics or video, audio, or you just zone out for the first 40 minutes?
I zone in for the very beginning. There's definitely times when I kind of catch myself zoning out or reading all the nonsense in the chat. But boys, I'm doing well. It's Friday. I got my buddy Justin Clefbaum over my shoulder right here, hanging out with me. It's a fine Friday. Couldn't be happier. Happy to see Harm too.
Yeah, absolutely. We love Harm on Fridays. It makes the show I feel more comfortable doing it on a Friday. We're like, what day do we want to do this week? Friday made the most sense for all of us. Hey, let's dive in. Normally we do a bunch of this BS off the top, but we got Vancouver Canucks news that happened right at noon today on Friday. Patrick Allvin announced a 2-year contract signing of free agent center Pius Suter. Harm, your first thoughts on this? Because listen, I've been reading The Athletic. We're going to get to your stuff about Elias Pettersson and the contract situation a little bit later, but you guys wrote about Pius Suter a ton at The Athletic for a guy that you want the Canucks to go out and approach. And now that the deal's done, $1.6 million, what are your thoughts on the deal right now?
I love it. It's a fantastic get for the Canucks because I like the Teddy Blueger signing, considering the value, the 1 year of term, keeping the cap hit below $2 million, especially his defensive skill set, the shutdown ability. But offensively, I wasn't convinced that there was enough there for him to be a third line center on most teams. In fact, I would argue that he definitely would not be that type of player on a playoff bound team, especially when you look at his time in Pittsburgh, right? The Penguins with Jeff Carter centering that third line had one of the worst third lines in the NHL. They were consistently looking for new combinations, and they didn't even look towards Blueger promoting him into a 3C role as a feasible option, despite Blueger having in previous years been a 3C at times. There just wasn't enough offensive upside there. And even when he goes to Vegas has ridiculously deep center depth. And so he's in and out of the lineup again, more so in a 4C role. So you like the signing, you like the value. You much prefer to going after, let's say, JT Compher or Ryan O'Reilly, but then you're thinking, okay, is he quite good enough for a 3C role? And this is where Suter is a fantastic addition because he has genuinely played in top 9 roles since he entered the NHL as originally a European signing for the Chicago Blackhawks. He's got legit middle six experience. He's coming off a year where he only had, I believe, 24 points in 79 games, but you got to keep in mind, I believe 14 or 15 of those points were goals, right? So this is a guy that consistently chips in 14 to 15 goals, gives you the secondary offense that I wasn't sure that the Canucks had enough of with their lineup currently constructed. And you tack on the fact that you've got multiple options now at center ice in terms of how you can construct your bottom six. And I think going into free agency and in talking about the center ice position, we all knew the Canucks needed an upgrade there. I think the exact balance that a lot of us were sort of banging the drum for was try and find bargain signings, go after multiple of those options, and plug those holes from a short-term perspective, especially because we'll talk about the short-term ramifications, but even more medium-term, it leaves the door open for Aatu Ratu. If he hits as a prospect in a couple of years, he's a 3C contender. In 2 years, in 2-3 years, he could be that type of player. And let's say in an alternate timeline where the Canucks are feeling so much pressure and they go out and sign a Comfer or an O'Reilly, then all of a sudden it blocks the path. And the whole value of having a young player like Ratu when they hit is that he's so cheap and you can fill in an important, typically expensive filter role like 3C with such a cheap player. So it gives them flexibility in the medium term. And Suter has the legit 2-8 chops to be a third line center. So I love this pickup for the Canucks.
Yeah, lots of excitement here in the chat. I can obviously see it. And you brought it up, like the defensive numbers are really impressive. We do have a chart here from Hockey Viz that we'll pull up for the folks on YouTube. Just seeing how much he can make an impact, not only at 5-on-5 defensively, but I was kind of blown away with the expected goals per 60 numbers dropping down 15% off of what had happened there with the Red Wings last year. We're talking about a guy who's not only going to be a good two-way player at 5-on-5, but you mentioned the offense. He's had double-digit even strength goals in all 3 of his NHL seasons. That's impressive. Actually, like a minimum of 12 at least in each season. And you brought it up. He's played 3 years in the NHL. He scored 14 goals once. Scored 15 goals next season, and then this past season, you mentioned it as well, 14 goals for him. So I look at it as like Pius Suter was playing with Adam Ernie and Lucas Raymond, who's very talented but still very young. Oscar Sundqvist were his wingers. Like the Canucks, I feel like are going to put him into a spot where, yeah, he put up 14 goals last year, but now maybe he's playing with a Brock Besser, a Connor Garland, a Vasily Podkolzin, and Niels Höglander. I feel a little bit better about those names than the names I just mentioned from Detroit. I can see the offense jumping up, so I'm wondering, like, could he still maintain that defensive ability that we've liked so much about the player when he was a free agent? But now that he's here and in the roster, I think there's more upside for the offense from what we see about, how he fits in the lineup compared to maybe an upside for defense here.
Yeah, I expect him not necessarily to have an uptick in goals because, again, he's consistently been in the 14-15 range.
Yeah, he's proved that's
a sweet spot. Yeah. But points-wise, 30-plus is definitely a reasonable expectation if he stays healthy. And the whole point of why the Canucks were able to land him at this point in free agency is because he's coming off a down year, right? That's otherwise, if he had another year where he was clipping at, let's say, close to half a point per game, then teams would have been lining up and willing to pay him like over $3 million, which is what he got on his last contract.
Right.
And that would have priced him probably out of the Canucks' range. So this is exactly the type of opportunity the Canucks should be capitalizing on. And the other reason why he's probably undervalued is because we can talk about how great his defensive numbers are, but in the eyes of a lot of teams, especially ones that value size, probably don't view him as a prototypical checking center because he's 5'11" and a little bit slight, which is a good thing for a team like the Canucks because it creates that opportunity that otherwise probably wouldn't have been there. The other way of sort of looking at it too is you even look at the 5-on-5 production historically over the last 3 years, him compared to JT Compher, because Drance and I had done a piece going into free agency about, and this was a national piece, not even Canucks specific, about top 10 sort of looking at bargain options of like, hey, here's the splashy, expensive option, and then here's the bargain one who can probably provide a lot of comparable value at a fraction of the cost. You look at Compher versus Pius Suter, 5-on-5 offensive numbers in terms of points per 60, goals, nearly identical. And that's where you look at the Canucks. We've come to almost kind of brand them over the last few years as offensively explosive, but defensively give up a ton and they're a disaster. But what's funny is you look at the 5-on-5 numbers for the Canucks, even offensively, they're not that impressive, right? Their offensive prowess has mostly come from, okay, when Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes are on the ice and when the power play is going, which has consistently been a force. So they haven't had enough even strength offense and that's where Suter coming in, again, his overall point totals don't look that impressive, but all that production is 5-on-5, and the Canucks are absolutely going to need that. So this is a fantastic addition for the Canucks. It makes me a lot more confident too. The other thing to keep in mind is if, let's say you run into a scenario where Pettersson gets hurt, God forbid, or Miller gets hurt, instead of having Teddy Bluger or Nils Amon as your next man up as your second line center,
right,
you at least have a guy like Suter who can fill in competently, or if Miller is really, really struggling defensively for whatever reason at center, gives you more options to play with. You can shift Miller to the wall, have Suter play center. So it's important even as an insurance policy, because as we know, team always runs into injuries.
Absolutely. And I think the interesting thing for me is going to be kind of what you mentioned there, like it's some flexibility in the lineup. And I think we all knew that there needed to be something addressed with the 3C position. I think a lot of us knew that this would be a deal that we would like. Like, this is not something that came out of left field, like, you know, like Brandon Sutter getting a PTO with Edmonton. It's not like that. Like, we all had an idea that Suter might be signing with the Vancouver Canucks. It's something Rick Dollywell's been on for I don't know how many months now. But in the fact that you guys have brought him up so much at The Athletic as a potential signing that you like, or somebody coming in, as you mentioned, yeah, you don't need to go to JT Compher. Instead, go with a lower guy who's making a little bit less, but can bring you a good amount of what you mentioned with Compher. And the 5-on-5 is going to be interesting because you brought it up, and Suter didn't have, he has more shorthanded goals over his career than power play goals. So that's where he's going to really fit in. And man, we've seen the Canucks really attack that penalty kill unit of theirs this coming off season, right? Like, they have changed a lot of the bodies that you're going to see out there when they have 4 men on the ice. I guess I'll ask you this question. Like, do you see Suter being like the first guy over? He was the 3rd most used forward in Detroit last year on the penalty kill, but really impressive penalty killing numbers. And I don't think he's the best in the faceoff dot. He's got a career win percentage of 46.7%. So it's not like he's an absolute animal in the dot, but 46%, I guess it's fine. It's not like he's under 40 or anything, but it's certainly not impressive. But at $1.6 million, like, I really think the Canucks did a good job here addressing that 3C position. And as for a penalty killer, like, I could see him being a guy who maybe bumps JT Miller off of the penalty kill. As we saw somebody in the chat mentioned it earlier. Like, is that a situation that really changes the outlook at the penalty kill as a whole, adding a guy like Suter now?
Yeah, I don't think it changes anything in the sense that Bluger is still my first guy for all of the boards as the centerman, taking the draws, especially, which Alvin noted his Bluger's PK faceoff numbers as well, which is absolutely critical, right? You need a guy that can consistently win those faceoffs, because when you're first unit, you lose that first draw, man, the other team's set up right away. Whereas if you win that initial draw, get the initial clearance, not only does it clear 20, 25 seconds off the clock just like that, but then if the team has issues entering the zone, if they are struggling connecting passes, like, before you know it, it's like you get the initial clear, you get 1 or 2 stops at the neutral zone, you might have already killed off a minute of that penalty. So that's why with Bluger and his faceoff ability, I think he'd be my choice as a first center over the boards, especially because among heavy usage penalty killers, he has one of the best goals against rates among all NHL forwards. So he's got I don't want to say elite, but might be elite. Yeah. Very close to that type of track record. So Suter, I look at as great second PK. Maybe you have him alongside Elias Pettersson. Have 2 guys there that can both in a pinch take draws and can apply a lot of pressure. And we saw how effective Pettersson was on the second unit. So he'll make an impact there for sure.
I was writing the news story for Canucks Army, and you should be able to see it by now. It should be edited and put up there. But I brought up, like, what's the best case scenario? In my eyes, it was like he scores 20 goals. He finds a little bit more offense with, let's say he has really good wingers and finds a little bit more offense there, adds 2 or 3 shorthanded goals. That's kind of best case scenario. And then I wrote, and this is the worst case scenario. And I kind of struggled for a second to, like, give an actual answer there. Like, what is the worst case scenario here with Suter? He's on a $1.6 million contract for the next 2 years. He's making less money than Teddy Bluger, $300,000 less. So that's why I think the contract even looks better. The fact that you have him for 2 years and less money than Bluger, like, I can see, I guess I'm trying to think, what is the worst case scenario here? Like, he just, like, I don't know. It's not like he's going to fall completely off the map at 27. He scored, like you said, 14 goals in each of his NHL seasons. So I feel like that's going to happen. Like, he's going to get you 10 goals. He's probably going to play in a 3C role and be defensively responsible. But what would be the worst case do you think could happen here with this contract, if anything?
Well, that's the whole point, is with these value signings, it's not the contract, it's the fit, in the sense of, okay, if this guy doesn't pan out, if he doesn't mesh with his wingers in a potential third line role, then we're still kind of hooped at 3C. We're still looking at that as a weakness for our overall lineup, but I mean, you live with that risk all day long, as opposed to going out and overpaying a guy in free agency.
Let's get to some comments here in the YouTube chat. Ted Wong says, thanks for jumping on and having a pod, boys. Jimmy Grimmy says, pretty stoked on this signing. Great numbers / term as well. And Brian Choi asks, I don't know if you've already talked about it, but Rick Dollywell says Canucks can be cap compliant without a trade. Any idea how that might happen? So if Tanner Pearson and Tucker Poolman are both on LTIR, the Canucks are under the cap. But there's been a lot of little rumblings about Tanner Pearson coming back, being healthy and skating on the ice and these type of things. Without that, like if Pearson's healthy, the Canucks are over the cap by a few $1 million, a couple of $1 million at least. So I'm curious, do you think that there's another move, and any idea what it might be? I think Tyler Myers is $6 million is the big number that we all look at. But if Pearson comes back, they kind of need to clear up about $2.8 million worth of space. That's not a small penny to kind of throw away. That's something you have to attach to get that money off their books.
Yeah. So a few things to note right off the bat as a disclaimer. I haven't had a chance to play around in Cap Friendly yet. Literally the news happened just as we were coming over, and that would be my chance of, fiddle around and move bodies around and that sort of thing. So that's an important qualifier for what I'm about to say. But before the Suter signing, I remember even then there was this conversation about, okay, Canucks are over the cap if Pearson's healthy. The thing is, you have to remember, you don't have to play, first of all, with a 23-man roster.
Right.
That's just the maximum. We've seen plenty of examples of teams that if they're struggling with cap compliance and they're technically over the cap, they can just send some extra bodies down to Abbotsford or whatever, their equivalent of their AHL affiliate. And especially if you have guys that are waiver exempt, it's a pretty seamless sort of solution. In fact, it's pretty common. You see it a lot. Second,
and just to add to that, for people who might have missed a little bit, like you could go down to having your roster be 20 bodies.
Yeah.
Right. If you do that, you're saving a minimum of $1 million. You're saving like a maximum of $1.1 million on each. So you can clear up $3.3 million of cap space by sending 3 guys down.
Also, when Suter signs, it's not 1.6 extra added to the books because he's taking up one of the roster spots that somebody else would have taken.
Yeah. So if you're taking a guy who's $900K, you're
then
adding $700,000.
Exactly.
Something like
so
that.
that's not a prohibitive amount to sort of play around with. Next, these NHL teams are very meticulous about planning these things beforehand. They're not going to just sign a guy and then be like, oh crap, we haven't looked at all our scenarios for how we're going to be cap compliant. Like, they're 100% thinking about this. There's no way that they did this without for sure ensuring that there are multiple avenues for them to be cap compliant. So I'm not really worried about it. And the other thing too is it's a pretty hefty assumption to think that Pearson will be ready for the start of the season, just because, like, think about it. This guy has had how many surgeries on his wrist, right? So he may be healthy for camp, but to be fit to be ready to play NHL games, I mean, like, I could say from experience, like, I had one really bad wrist break. Bone was out of place and everything. One surgery, and like, man, that was tough to recover from and get back up to speed and playing at my previous level. Then now you factor that, okay, Pearson's had, Dayal probably has the exact number, but what was it, 5-6 surgeries on the same hand? And you're talking about playing at an NHL caliber level. Like, there's still a good chance that he may end up on LTIR, even if he shows up to camp or that sort of thing. I mean, how many times have we seen Pullman show up to camp and then it's like, it's unfortunate, but it's just, he's not able to play, right? So I really hope for Pearson's sake that he's able to play and that he's able to get healthy. Really do, because man, he's been through a lot and he didn't deserve to go through any of this. It must be an absolute nightmare, but it's still a lot, in my opinion, to think that he'll be ready to play NHL games right from October.
Yeah, I've been saying it for a long time. I'm still going to be very surprised if he's, and I can't even say, like, I can't see him being 100% healthy at the start of training camp. I can't see it. I understand, advances in modern medicine. I'll say that was a good one, but I don't know. I really think it's going to be very difficult for him to not only like be 100% healthy for training camp, but I also think there's a difference between you mentioned breaking your wrist. Right, you can still type now. You made a recovery fine. You were probably able to type like a few weeks after. Living your life and being healthy, especially with a wrist injury, is very different than when you're actually in a hockey game. Like
and
I
not
remember
just a hockey game, NHL,
Yes.
highest level. And in Pearson's case, already talking about a guy that it's not as if he was a superstar, right?
Yeah.
He was sort of he was struggling before he got hurt there. So man, I wish him all the best of luck because
sure.
this is going to be a tough road to recovery.
Yeah, and really loved guy in the room. Everybody talks about how much they like him. The JT Miller conversation, which I guess we'll transition to a little bit here. Unless there's anything else on Suter you wanted to kind of dive in on. I know, everybody's going to get their deep dives out. I know you and I will both be watching a lot of tape tonight for sure, and we'll have some articles.
Oh, I'm on
over the next
vacation.
couple days.
I'm
really?
technically on. Yeah, Drance is going to be responsible for that.
Just came here to take some of that big Canucks convo money, and then take that to the bar on the weekend. I see what you're up to, Harm. Yeah, I'll be spending a lot of time watching it tonight anyways. We'll have some stuff to get up on Canucks Army. Be sure to check that out. But let's switch gears a little bit to the JT Miller interview with the Cam and Strick podcast, because there's a lot to take away from it. Did you listen to that, or are you really on vacation hard?
No, I listened to it.
Okay, because Quads is on vacation so hard he doesn't even know who Pius Suter is. So like he's taking a real vacation. But the interview was like, I'm seeing a lot of reaction on social media of not necessarily people saying this exact phrase, but like there's a lot of real big hype about JT Miller. I've seen a couple be like, this is our captain. This is captain material, the way he talks about it. Like there's a couple guys in the media that I don't like. And that was the big quote to kind of take away. But there was a lot of other things in the conversation that I like. The Andy and Strick podcast did a very good job making him comfortable. I'll say that. Like they propped him up. They made him feel very comfortable on that podcast. And he was very honest. I think that came from the comfortability that he had on the show. What were some of the big things that you took away? And we do have the quote about writing a book from the last couple seasons. We'll play that whenever you want. But what was the one big thing that you maybe took away from the interview that obviously probably made its rounds on social media as well?
Well, overall, it was just the takeaway that I loved the interview. I thought it was honest. I thought it was authentic. It was transparent. It was JT Miller speaking his mind. And I don't think there's enough of that in hockey.
It's hard to get a player to do that.
These guys hide behind cliches, and I get it, right? Because this is exactly what they fear. Not Miller, because he doesn't really care what other people think. But this idea of when you speak your mind, it's everybody's going nuts on social media. It's polarizing all the pressure.
Pettersson's bad for that. He's, I don't want to give you a quote, or I don't want to give you a story
exactly. Like right? Pettersson's terrified of, and I understand it, right? Because like it's different for Miller. He's wired different in just being able to not care about the outside noise at all. But we need more of this. I mean, you look at the NBA in comparison.
You can't compare them.
Well, right? Like it's so much more fun.
Yeah,
like guys are just able to speak their truth, and it's normal, and it makes the game exciting. It adds more personality, more spice, more flavor. I mean, even look at Bo Horvat when he had that whatever comment at the post game walk-off interview. Yeah, like that's good for the game. Like, sure, you can villainize him all you want. I will not by any means criticize any Canucks fan for not liking that and being like, okay, screw Bo. That's the fans' right. But I will also, sit here and say if Bo wants to do that, let him do that. If that's how he feels,
totally
let him speak. It's good for the game. So
I feel like he held back. He could have been a lot more honest, right? Like that was still like a toned down version of what you probably, if you got him with a couple of drinks and like a glass of wine, like
seriously,
say very different things.
We need more of this was my overall takeaway. And I have always been appreciative of the fact that Miller is honest with you, never hides behind cliches. And that's why, for me, I've had a fantastic relationship with him since he came to Vancouver. He's always been accommodating. I have nothing but excellent things to say about his professionalism dealing with me as a media member. And I have absolutely, look, it doesn't mean I agree with everything he says.
For sure.
But I respect his right to say everything that he did. And I love the interview as a whole.
I think that, yeah, that's the thing from spending this past year being in the locker room every practice, every game. Like, you're always going to get JT Miller, and you're always going to get probably if you're being straight about it, the most honest quotes probably from that locker room came from JT Miller last year, right? Like, I think that obviously the Quinn Hughes comments last year about the Tanner Pearson situation, those were very honest comments as well. But if you're looking for a player talking about what's going on around the team and you don't want it to be watered down at all, JT Miller's your guy for that in this locker room. Do I take that and extrapolate it to being the captain of this team? No, I still don't do that. I think, listen, calling out a media member, and I guess it's not you since you guys are buddy. I thought it was you he was talking about.
Really?
No, I'm just kidding, Harman. Obviously not. I know he likes you. We all know who it is. But and it's not Drance. Drance is good. Everybody in the comments is saying Drance.
I don't know who this is.
I could guess.
It's not Drance. I'll tell you that.
I don't think it's Drance either. He does have
Drance has a good relationship with him too. So
I did laugh at it. Like
I actually genuinely don't know who he's referring to though. Maybe you'll have to tell me after.
We might have to do a little Patreon special after. I think we could talk our way through and find the answer. But no, that's the funny thing was every reply was like all of them were adding Drance, and I'm like, it's not Drance. Like, Drance and Miller actually have a pretty good relationship together. But that's the thing. I mean, from the interview, I took away a lot. And let's play the clip of him just listen. This is being honest about pretty much his time since he got to Vancouver, saying that they could have wrote a book about everything that's gone about the Vancouver Canucks in the last little bit, and we'll probably see it happen. We'll probably see somebody write a book. Wags is already working on his other book about the draft. This is the next story here. But Aaron, if we got the video, let's get it up here. JT Miller, this is just his comments. And then we'll kind of move on from this because I think a lot of this has been talked about throughout the week, but it's our first show since doing it. But here's JT Miller talking about they could write a book about the past couple Vancouver Canucks seasons.
From our start to, Travis getting fired 2 years ago, I guess, to Bruce coming in, and then the whole shit show with Bruce at the end of his tenure. I don't even know what to say. It was just so bad, and it's just another season I want to just kind of erase. I mean, I'm glad that up until the point where Rick, everything just changed when Rick got there. So up until then, it's amazing how things. You write one article, and then all of a sudden the city believes one thing, and then it becomes healthy again. So it's I don't know. I'm definitely excited that we're kind of turn the page and move on and can put some things in the past. With the deadline and all the rumors about people getting traded, and it's just a shit show to say the least.
Apologies to the kids out there, right? This is a family show. We don't swear on the show, but JT Miller accidentally did. My bad. I should have clipped those out. So apologies for children in the car. You'll learn that word at some point in your life. Anyways, anything else you want to do in the JT Miller? I feel like there's a lot of time that's been spent on it. Like I appreciate him being honest. I don't go away from that interview and say, yeah, he's the captain now.
Yeah.
I did find, I really think that, like I said, Cam Strick did a really good job pumping his tires for that interview. They got him to be honest. They did a very good job as that type of media of like, we're buddies with you and tell us what you want. They did a really good job. I'll give them credit for that for sure. But even like some of the things where they were talking about JT Miller, like being the leader, and it's nice to have like the young guys like Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes helping him along the way. I'm like, I think those two guys are the ones driving the bus here, man. Like Miller's a player that helps them along the way, I think. But overall, yeah, it was nice to get some content for us in the very dry part of the season. So we'll move on to something that you've been writing about this at The Athletic, and it's obviously a conversation that's on a lot of Canucks folks' minds, maybe in kind of that worrying part of your brain. It's kind of keying up the anxiety with Elias Pettersson, his contract coming up here. He's into the final year now. He's going to be an RFA after this year. Where are you at with when this gets done, and do you think that they're kind of talking between a bridge deal that maybe lines up with Quinn Hughes' contract or a long-term deal? Is that something they can possibly get done? Where do you think they're at right now with this contract? Is conversations, do you think they're even being had between the general manager and the agent?
Yeah, I think right now the sense that I get is it's more of a wait and see approach. I imagine that as we get closer to September, that those talks will pick up, because you got to remember, right? The Canucks had a ton of business to take care of through June, through July, even to this point, right? You're seeing it today with the news that came out. So they've had a lot of things to take care of. I mean, even look at it from JP Barry's perspective, Pettersson's agent. He has a ton of clients to be managing, including at the draft and in free agency. Then he's picking up Vladimir Tarasenko as a client. Those negotiations went deep. Then you want to take some time to sort of relax, right? Both management and the agent after absolutely crazy past couple months from their perspectives. And then it's like, okay, before camp's open, let's actually start talking. So that makes sense to me as a timeline for discussions to actually get going and for us to get a sense of where negotiations are at. Ultimately, the ball's in Pettersson's court, right? In terms of he has the power and leverage of, does he want to sign before the start of the season? Because that's ultimately the biggest question that I have going into these negotiations is how willing is he to sign a contract versus potentially letting the year play out, knowing that he's still under contract. And it's not as if he's expiring as a UFA from his perspective. He's still an RFA. It's not.
He's going to be in a Canucks jersey this
year. He's going to be in a Canucks jersey.
So sure.
That's a critical question, right? Because I think then if you enter a scenario where he's perhaps, let's say, in more of a wait and see, and I want to see how the year plays out. I want to see the direction of the franchise and whether we're headed in the right direction, because let's not kid ourselves. He really wants to be in a winning environment, and this franchise has to show that they're headed in that direction. So he has to weigh right now. And in having conversations with agents, it's a fascinating decision for a player in Pettersson's shoes, because it isn't a black or white thing. Because look, on the one hand, on paper, there is a lot of incentive to potentially waiting to see how things play out, right? Because again, you get a sense of where the team is at, because why would you, for example, want to sign an 8-year deal before you know whether this franchise has gotten its crap together or not?
Sure.
And second, the leverage just tips in your favor. The longer this goes on, the more pressure is on the team. You're probably going to position yourself to earn more money. You might get to see what Matthews makes on his next contract. And when you look at what Matthews did on his last deal, right? There are 15 players when I last checked on Cap Friendly that are on a $10 million higher cap hit. Only 2 of those 15, Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, signed for less than max term. So that goes to show you right there. Matthews on his last contract, he got the 11.6 and change on the AAV. He got the exact AAV he wanted, and he was able to limit the terms to 5 years and walk himself to UFA. That was one of the most player-friendly contracts we've seen a star player sign over the last, I can't even remember, last half decade.
And
maybe.
Players that are in that position of the league, they have the power to be able to swing like that. Like they should be able to get themselves that deal.
And Matthews was the first one, in my opinion, to semi-flex it. And now it's like, if I'm Pettersson's agent right now, I have no idea how his camp is thinking. I have no idea what he himself is thinking. I'd be really curious to see and almost wait to see what Matthews does, because if he right now, McKinnon at 12.6 is like a ceiling, right? Yes. Because there's no way as a player in Pettersson's situation, you can look at McKinnon as a cup winner, the caliber of player that he is, probably the second best player in the NHL. Like that's such a hard cap on your earning potential. Whereas if Matthews signs and he's able to push to 13 and a half, whatever the number is, that's going to pull up guys like Pettersson with him. So anyway, there's that potential incentive to waiting.
Yeah. Just to add to that, what it does in my eyes is like, you're climbing the mountain of how much money you're making. Right now you're at the top with McKinnon, and Pettersson's not going to beat that.
Yeah. No chance.
He can get close to it. He could get very close to it. He could be in the 11s, but you're right. If Matthews goes 13 and a half, then that's higher up the mountain. That's higher up for Pettersson to reach and still not be the top guy anymore. So I want to push back a little, because I think it's a spot that's really good for Pettersson if he plays well. And I also think it's kind of good for the Canucks, because right now, if I were to just say, okay, like if you got both parties together, like a deal needs to be done right now, I think it would be a 4-year deal, 5-year deal, that type of thing, 3, 4, 5-year deal. But I think if we go through a season and things go well, you're talking about an 8-year deal for Pettersson. Like a good season, everything is, there's no distractions around the team. The organization runs and takes steps in the right direction all season long. You're talking about an 8-year deal. I don't think that's where I'm leaning right now of what a deal that I think is going to happen for Pettersson. If it happens in the next 4 months or whatever, I have a feeling it's going to be 4 or 5 years or 3, 4 years type of thing. But I think if you do wait a season, there's a better chance of it being 8 years.
Well, maybe I don't know if at least from the club's perspective, I would not be looking at that, because then you're banking on, okay, we got to get our crap together this year.
Sure.
That's a big assumption.
That's what Pettersson wants, though. Like that is exactly
but
what he
I'd
wants
be,
from New
if
York.
I'm in the team's position, I'm pushing aggressively as possible to try and get an 8-year deal done.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is I don't think the Pettersson camp is in the spot right now to feel confident about going in 8 years. Like right now, I don't think they are.
Absolutely. That's a valid
I would
concern.
have to. That's just my view on it.
Absolutely. What I'd be trying to do if I'm the Canucks though is, man, if you're looking at 8 years and you give him even 11.5 million,
Yeah.
right? At that point, you're talking the 90-ish million range in guaranteed total money. You sign on the dot right now. Man, that's a crap load of money to turn down. And one thing I will say is it was interesting in having conversations with agents is they're like, a lot of times when you just put a massive, you just back up the Brinks truck and you're just dropping bands on bands on bands and you just push it like in front of the player's face, it's tough to say no, even when saying no might be in the client's best interest in terms of long-term maximizing their paycheck. So
like
you
when you're buying something off of someone and you're like cash in hand right now, like here's the money. This is the deal that'll make it happen.
Exactly.
A lot of the time they take
and that's the benefit with 8 years is right. It's like that's the largest total money you can offer him. And so I'd be if I'm the Canucks, as aggressive as possible. And the other reason too is the flip side of the coin in terms of, okay, from Pettersson's situation, okay, that's a side of the reasons we mentioned of, okay, why a wait and see approach might make sense. The other side of it, though, is that not every player is wired for that type of pressure, for that type of weight. And sometimes guys just want that security. And the other thing to keep in mind is, like, one agent brought the point up that if he has a client in Pettersson's situation, he's saying, you got to look yourself honestly in the mirror and go, if there's a scenario where I've got struggling out of the gate, 2 points in 10 games, how panicky am I? How much pressure am I putting on myself? Can I still perform through the rest of the season? All of those mental sort of health factors. Do I want all that buzz around me? All those storylines? Do I want it being a potential distraction for my teammates? And for a lot of guys, the answer is no, especially in a big Canadian market, right? Yeah. And this is where
I think players in Vancouver or Toronto, it's nice for them to go to the media and never have to talk about a contract.
Yeah, you think he wants to, like, I would hate if I was in his position. First day of camp, what's Pettersson's going to be asked about? It's contract situation.
You know that's happening this year. That's why I almost wonder. Like, I wonder if they start to get together soon about this. Because let's be honest, a contract like this, and we'll bring up the Sebastian Aho one. Actually, we can just get it up here on the side. But like a contract that is going to be this big, this long, whether it is 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 8 years. You don't get this deal done over the phone, I don't think either. This is one that you have to meet in person for. So I can get what you're saying with JP Barry not getting a deal or not getting around to this. I bet he's going to want to meet with Patrick Allvin in person, whether it's in Vancouver or down in LA at their offices. Like, they're going to want to get together. But I think we've kind of established at this point, if we do see an 8-year deal for Pettersson, this is below the floor in my eyes, what Sebastian Aho just signed for at $9.75 million. Pettersson's clearly getting in the tens if he signs right now on an 8-year deal. I would be curious to see, like, if the Canucks announced in 20 minutes from now, as they like to do their Friday news dumps, or maybe they're saving it for next Friday, but if they announced right now that Pettersson has signed an 8-year extension at $11.5 million cap hit, I'd be like,
massive dub.
Awesome. Yeah, they would be having a couple of very good weeks. And I have to think at $11.5 million, you brought it up, like you're getting that $90 million statement at the end of that contract that you're signing. I have to feel like Pettersson would probably want to sign that too. So I wonder what the holdup would be. Like, what is Vancouver trying to nickel and dime him? Because these are the players you don't do that.
No, well, I mean, naturally with negotiations, right? You're never going to make your best offer right off the bat. Very true. You're going to make your best offer, whether it's a company. Everybody knows this. You're going to get the best offer closer to the deadline, and I think the first sort of like unofficial deadline we're looking at is probably start of training camp, right? As it often sort of is. And that's what we even saw when you look at JT Miller finally signing, right? That was a deal done around Labor Day weekend. That was early September.
Yep.
So I have no doubt in my mind that the Canucks have probably not made their best offer yet. And they'll probably make their best offer closer to sometime in September. I don't think it's a case of them nickel and diming at all. It's just standard negotiating practice. And I'm again, going to be interested to see just how confident is Pettersson sort of betting on himself, and how does he even view the logic of signing 8 years versus a medium-term deal? Because I'll tell you this, if you're trying to maximize the amount of money you make, signing shorter term is almost a no-brainer in terms of the direction of the cap. How much is it's expected to spike? You could have a salary cap higher than 90 million in 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
Plus more contract comparables in the meantime. And on top of that, you're hitting the open market again in your 20s. At 28, you're going to get another mega deal, as opposed to if you sign an 8-year deal, your next deal is at 32. You're not going to get another mega deal.
No, you're not getting 7 years
So
at that point. Well, you might, but
that's another consideration that it really comes down to, like, how much does a guy value security in all of this? And if you're the Canucks, you're really hoping that a guy like Pettersson values security, that he's that personality type. Because if Pettersson values security, he's more likely to want to sign before the start of the season, and he's more likely to want to take the massive paycheck for 8 years as opposed to signing shorter term.
the only thing I could see is he's got the same agent as Quinn Hughes. Maybe we see a 3-year extension, and then you're really talking about, okay, well, they're betting on themselves for those 3 years. And hey, if things work out in Vancouver, they get huge contracts. If things don't work out in Vancouver, they're going to go get some money somewhere else and play for a contender. Quinn's going to be with the Devils playing with his brothers, and Pettersson's going to find a fit somewhere else and be an absolute number one and be probably the biggest name in free agency that we've seen in years. I mean, they have options. You mentioned it. You said, I think it might have been the first thing you said when I asked about this. The ball's in Pettersson's court.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a tough thing for an organization to be put in. But to me, it has to start with a blank check and let's get an 8-year deal done. And let's not worry about it. Let's talk about this in 2035.
Yeah.
When you're 24 years old. How old will you be then? And an 8-year contract from here.
What year?
I'll be almost 40. So just 8 years from now. How old are you
8
now?
years from now, I'm 23 right now.
So you'll be in your 30s if they get an 8-year deal done. Wow. Okay. It creeps up on you, Harman. It creeps up on you.
That's 8 years from now, man.
Yeah, it is a while actually. We'll have a couple days in between there. I do want to get to something that we wrote about, or something that I put together here with some graphics. I told you to give me your ideal top 6, and I thought it was kind of nice to have. I mean, it was incredible to get the Suter signing before this show because it gave us some live news to talk about instead of last week. The news and notes we literally did on this show was a photo of Archer Silov's new statue situation, like art set up outside of the arena there in Riga, which is, by the way, awesome.
Is that actually a thing?
Yeah, it's like him and his pads
amazing.
covering the net, and there was photos of people like bowing down.
That's
to him
cool as hell, man.
It's very cool.
I didn't see that.
I don't know if it's a good idea, and I mentioned this last week on the show, but just go to Archer Silov's Instagram, and not like his post, but the ones that he's tagged in. Everybody in Latvia is going nuts for this guy.
That's awesome,
so,
man.
interesting thing, and I do want to talk a little bit of Silovs, but I don't think we're gonna have time today because there's a lot of stuff we can get into with him as the offseason goes on. But we did our top
I'm not
6.
quads, man.
I know it's true.
No goalie talk here today.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Oh, I thought you were gonna say you have nowhere to be, so we're gonna be here for a while. But we'll go for another 20 minutes or so here, and we'll spend some time on the top 6. We'll start with yours, and I was happy that we had different top 6s. Gives us something to argue about a little bit, or discuss politely, whatever you want to call it. We'll start with your top 6. Let's get the graphic up here, Aaron, from Harm's top 6. You're going with Anthony Beauvillier, Elias Pettersson, and Andrei Kuzmenko on the top line. Your second line, Ilya Mikheyev, JT Miller, and Brock Besser. So let's start with the top line there. We've spent a lot of time on Pettersson. Let's talk about his wingers in your ideal top 6. Anthony Beauvillier is the one that surprised me a little bit. Not a ton.
Yeah.
I get some people are putting him there, but he's the name that I don't think. Like Kuzmenko's a lock beside Pettersson. I feel like Beauvillier, like that spot's kind of open. Why did you choose to put him there on Pettersson's line?
It's because I trust Pettersson and Kuzmenko enough to drive that line, and I think Mikheyev offers more value in lifting the second line than Beauvillier would. It's more about spreading the talent for me rather than completely loading up one line. And the reason I say that is because I think that second line, Miller, Besser, Mikheyev, you're probably, based off what we saw from Tocchet and even Boudreau beforehand, Miller's probably going to go up against the other team's best lines. Even if it's not in a hard match role, he's going to get a lot of, opening night, he's going to get a lot of McDavid and Draisaitl. And if he's doing that, he needs more speed on his wings. You look back at why the Canucks had a disastrous start last season, and Miller was on for all the first 8 goals against. It wasn't just Miller. It was the fact that, okay, he had no help on his wings from a defensive perspective. Brock Besser, who's typically pretty reliable and who I expect to bounce back from a two-way perspective, had by far his worst defensive season of his career, right? Struggled with turnovers and all sorts of things. So Miller didn't have that help. And Tanner Pearson had just lost a step, right? He was too slow. And that line as a whole, foot speed-wise, Besser is not fleet of foot. You need more speed on that line, in my opinion. And that's where Mikheyev, and of course, a lot of this hinges on, okay, how healthy does he look in camp coming back from his ACL surgery?
Big time, yeah. Hopefully
he still has that pop and explosiveness in his stride. That's a big assumption. But if he does, then he's going to add that speed on the forecheck and in providing a lot of the dirty work, in my opinion, that line needs, especially in consideration of his defensive chops and how disruptive he is, how many battles he wins. Again, you want to talk about who's going to match McDavid's speed. I would like the idea of entrusting Mikheyev in this type of checking role.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. That it makes a lot of sense. I guess the only thing I look at is with Beauvillier playing with Pettersson, you still want your best offensive player to be in the best offensive position. And you bring up a very good point with balancing out the top six, and I agree with you that Mikheyev does help do that. I don't think Beauvillier is I think Beauvillier is a little bit more of a trusted defensive mind. Like, he can play, he's a solid defensively. He's not going to blow you away. He's not Mikheyev's level, that's for sure. I don't think I had Beauvillier in my top six, and that was kind of the interesting thing when I saw yours, and I kind of knew where you were going to go with this. I had a feeling you were going to talk about balancing out that second line and bringing some defense there, and that's true. I just felt like in mine, I loaded up the top six a little more. We'll get mine up here now too. I loaded up the top line a little bit more with more offense. I did Kuzmenko at left wing, Pettersson there in the middle, and then Mikheyev on the right wing. And that's where I struggled, because I was like, I don't know if I love Beauvillier on the second line. I could see him being on the third line. And now with Pius Suter coming in, I like that even more now. I like Beauvillier and Suter on a third line with Connor Garland. Like, that feels like a third line that should beat a lot of other teams' third line. So I went with Podkolzin sliding into the top six. And I know that's a difficult spot, but I think that after the season that he just had, kind of understanding the person he is, the player he is, the work ethic that this guy carries, I think he's coming back this year hard. Like, he has to in his own right. And it's certainly possible that he flops, because think about last year going into the season. Not only were we talking about Podkolzin being the guy who steps up and really kind of takes over and takes that big step, like NHL.com articles were talking about players who are going to have a breakout season. And I remember Vasily Podkolzin was the title photo that they used for that article. Like, he was primed to have a big step up last year, and it just didn't happen. He had to spend a decent amount of time in the AHL. But I like him on Miller's wing, and I like him with Brock Besser kind of as well, because you're looking at that defensive help. And I guess I'm banking on Podkolzin in my situation. You probably feel a little bit more confident about yourself because you're banking on Mikheyev. I would rather bank on Mikheyev's defensive play than Vasily Podkolzin's, but I don't feel horrible about having him on the second line, because I do think that puts him in a position to be a top six forward. And if Podkolzin or Niels Höglander, you could use his name as well, if one of those two players is a top six forward for you, really helps the third line, and it really helps the winger depth on this team. So that's why I put Podkolzin into my top six.
I like the idea of sort of Beauvillier and Suter, and now you've got a great third line. I disagree with Podkolzin in top six role, unless he takes a massive step.
Right.
And I expect him, obviously, to be better than he was last season. But you're penciling in a guy that had 7 points last season. 7 NHL points in your top
You got me there,
six.
Harm. I'll give you that one.
I just can't. I can't get over that, right?
Yeah.
And not to mention, you're throwing him almost to the wolves, right? Because again, that line's going to play toughs, and he has the potential to become a good defensive player. He's not there yet. He's still inconsistent. The work rate is always there, but he is not. He's just not quite there yet. I mean, look at, and the coaching staff doesn't have the trust in him yet, which I think they should have had more trust in him down the stretch, especially. But even in the second half, when the games didn't matter, he was playing 7, 8, 9 minutes a night. Do you think Rick Tocchet, day one, opening night, JT Miller, you're going up against Connor McDavid, do you think he's tapping Vasily Podkolzin on the shoulder? I think it's a lot to ask for. Again, I'm not saying that Podkolzin is incapable of a breakout, because we're seeing the amount of work he's putting in.
Yep,
Such a good kid.
Stayed in Vancouver again this summer.
I expect him to take a step this year, but penciling him in top six right away. He had 7 points last year, man.
Didn't have a child last year, though, Harm. He's got the dad strength now. I have to make some sort of argument against him. You got me good with that 7 points thing. I'll give you that. There's some other comments in here as well. I asked people to mention their top six. Vince says Podkolzin, Pettersson, Kuzmenko as his top line. Mikheyev, Miller, and Garland as the second line. I can see that happening too. That doesn't have Brock Besser in the top six. And what does that mean for a third line if Brock Besser's in that spot? Because I do think that there is as much as Connor Garland's game seems to not really fit with anyone, the guy that it fits with the best is JT Miller, I think, when they do play together.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's where Garland can be a little bit. But then in my eyes, that's why this line makes a lot of sense for me, because Mikheyev's on that line to help them out as well defensively and kind of be in the right position at all times. But in my lines, you're right. Putting Podkolzin on a line with JT Miller and Brock Besser, whose defense can be questioned at times for sure. I know we've talked about Brock Besser making a lot of improvements in that realm, but he's still not like dominant defensively. Like, he's not at that level. He probably will never be at that level. But I think it's interesting to think about it with Brock Besser out of the top six, because it's
I don't
real
like
possible.
it,
You don't
because
think so?
Brock Besser's at his best when he is not the best player on his line.
Mm.
Look at him; he's a complimentary guy. He's like, he reminds me a lot of almost Toffoli, right? Where he doesn't have the speed, right? He's not going to make dynamic plays on his own, but he's a guy that's smarter on the net and can get open and can complement elite skill, right? You look at when he's played his best, it was Lotto line, even in the shortened 56-game season when it was away from Pettersson. He still played a lot with JT Miller. And you look back at last season whenever he was playing third line and he was stuck with like Sheldon Dries, and the hope there is, okay, Brock Besser, you're a true top six talent on the third line. Let's hope you can drive this line. It never worked.
No, it didn't.
And it didn't. Whereas with Garland in the second half, we saw especially when he was sort of like the lone passenger sort of driving a third line, he was able to make it happen. He was able to produce 5-on-5 offense because he's more of a self-starter in terms of generating his own chances and being able to lug the puck, transport it, carry it, make plays, set guys up. He's more of an independent contractor, whereas Besser, I think, is more reliant on talent like a JT Miller to get him the puck and be at his best.
Get to some comments here. Tim Jones says Pod and Abby for me. Pod's on the second line is a deal breaker for me, is what Tim says. And Tim says I can actually see Hug winding up in a middle six role. So I had this. I was on Sportsnet 650 last couple days hosting with Josh Elliott Wolf, and his top six had Phil DiGiuseppe in it, and I thought that was wild. But it kind of brought up another conversation that I wanted to at least throw your way. Out of these, let's just go with two players in Vasily Podkolzin and Nils Höglander. Who's more likely to be on the outside looking in on opening night? Because is Podkolzin, I think the worry would be, can Höglander play fourth line for Rick Tocchet? Can he fit in that role? I think Podkolzin probably can a little bit more. But is there a view right now of Höglander, of him even being a legitimate possibility in the top nine role when you have Podkolzin that I think is above on a lot of people's depth charts than Nils Höglander? And don't get me wrong, I watched him a ton in the AHL. I loved what Höglander did developing last year. I also don't think it fixed everything. That AHL run didn't cure his defensive worries. It probably helped them a little bit, but it didn't cure everything. So I'm going into next season, and in my eyes, I have Podkolzin being more of an option in the top nine than Höglander. But I've seen this comment, and Tim's one that I'm bringing up here from the YouTube chat. I've seen this comment a little bit more and more. People saying Podkolzin's not even going to be in the opening night lineup. And it sounds crazy to me, but do you give any thought to, out of those two players, which one's more likely to be on the outside?
It's a good question. It's going to be obviously determined in camp. That's a smart ass answer. But right now, if I were sort of viewing it, I would say Höglander probably has a tougher road because, again, for starters, Podkolzin's physicality and size makes him a better fit, probably in more of a grinding fourth line type role alongside a Dakota Joshua. Höglander also probably has more defensive concerns in terms of his puck management, turnovers, and in-zone defensive play. Mm-hmm. And the other part that I was considering when they signed Suter was, okay, let's say you hypothetically have Suter and Garland as your two fixtures on a third line right now. Would Tocchet feel comfortable with Höglander as a third piece on that? Because Garland is undersized, Suter is slightly undersized, and then Höglander would be undersized.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd want to play three small guys on a line together.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're just trying to like barrage a team with offense. and a third line
Rick
role.
Tocchet doesn't seem like that,
Yeah,
that
and
type
that's
of
what I'm
guy,
saying
right?
here
He's
is-
like, I want. Don't you think he would be like, oh, I need some meat and potatoes. Give me Phil DiGiuseppe.
Yeah.
Over there.
Who, by the way, and I say this as much as I can. Phil DiGiuseppe is not 5'10". Like, he's 6'2". He's a
big body,
good sized guy. I think because
doesn't he seem like a Rick Tocchet guy?
He does, totally. But I think people look at PDG and they think of him as a quad A player. And I think when you think quad A player, you immediately think like 5'10" scorer. And that's not what Phil DiGiuseppe is. He to me, he's a fourth line NHL.
I think he's a good fourth liner.
Yeah, and you're right. He is the type of player who's going to run through a wall for a coach, especially if that coach believes in him. And Rick Tocchet absolutely believes in Phil DiGiuseppe. I just find it with so much more offensive talent on the wings. I actually see Phil DiGiuseppe potentially being the odd man out of that group. Like, I see him not even being on a fourth line. I can see him being the 13th.
Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
And
to
now
me.
with the Pius Suter signing, like, Neil Zaman is now an extra player. He's probably your 13th forward because he can play center. You can probably throw him on the wing if you really want to or whatever. So like the second center who's kind of their 14th guy now, like it could be Phil DiGiuseppe, it could be Niels Höglander. It's just it's very hard, I think, now to create your lineup and have both Podkolzin and Höglander in it. Like it's pretty hard to do.
Well, we also got to remember we're in August.
Totally.
I remember last year we came up with all these line combinations. This is how the top 9 is going to work. And oh my God, look at this depth. Like the season hasn't even started and Besser McKay ever hurt.
Right.
Like that's the other thing to keep in mind is right now you can look at it and be like, oh, so many guys on the outside looking in. How is this going to work? How are guys going to get an opportunity? And it's like, you may not even have to wait till opening night for a lot of those answers to unfortunately become obvious.
Yeah, they'll play out the situation for us in the first place. Okay, we're wrapping up here, so let's get to the poll question. Brought to you by the great folks at Atlas Good. You can find them on Twitter at AtlasGDS, and you can use our promo code CC15 for 15% off your first order of pop rinds. They are absolutely delicious. The pork rinds, you make them in your air fryer, you make them in your microwave. Takes a couple minutes, like 2 minutes, 1:30. You pop them out, popcorn seasoning, whatever you want to do. Dip them in some tzatziki, I've heard, is a little trick you can do, which sounds great to me. I'm a big tzatziki guy. We're having gyros. Is that what you call them? The gyros? They're pronounced gyros, I think. They're like the wraps. Oh, yeah. You only eat peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also try. Oh, this is a side note.
Yeah.
I fell in love with hot sauce yesterday.
Really? What kind?
Yeah. The sriracha.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's funny because I've always been a ketchup loyalist.
Yeah.
And I don't handle spice very well. So I've typically, anytime I'm like, people are like, oh, using hot sauce. Like my dad loves hot sauce or friends love hot sauce. And I'm like, oh, but I don't know if I'm going to like it. And then because I expect it to be spicy as hell. Right. But this sriracha, whatever hot sauce, I tried it with chicken thighs, and I've obviously tried hot sauce before, but man, there was just something different about how it hit. I was like, man, this is a nice kick. And even with
sriracha, you get some flavor too. It's not just a kick. Yeah.
And it's perfect because I'm like, even my not liking spicy flavors.
Yeah.
Loved and could easily take that. Like that's not really hot sauce.
I feel like everybody has this in their life where they try sriracha or not necessarily even try, but like commit to using it often. And you'll have a good 2-year stretch of your life. Like the next 2 years of your life, Harm, you're going to have a lot of sriracha. You'll have it on ramen. You'll have it on chicken. You'll have it on even some eggs. I like it on eggs. But like then I think you graduate to other hot sauce. But it's kind of like it's the entry. Yeah, it is the hot sauce world's opening. And now you're walking into it. But I bet the next 2 years you're going to put it on everything. As
just like
Frank
ketchup
said.
used to be.
Yeah. All right. We'll dive into Jay says DiGiuseppe is 6 foot, not 6'2". Yeah, you can go off a website. Will tell you that, but I've stood beside the guy, so I don't know what to tell you. He's absolutely 6'1", 6'2" ish type of range. If I'm 6'3", he's pretty much as tall as I am. So it's I don't know what the websites are telling you, but a lot of them. It's funny because a lot of them I feel like if you're 5
just
foot,
like Quentin Hughes, I'm like, bud,
dude.
I don't think like I'm 5'10". I don't think you're 5'10", bud.
No, there's a lot of these sites that's the weirdest thing for me is guys that are. Players that are, I think, 6'2" are often put at 6 foot or 6'1". And sorry if this is boring. This is like behind the scenes stuff, but it blows me away. That's why I go with my test of like, okay, I'm 6'3". If a player is taller than me, they're a very big player in the NHL. Like they're a big player. Like You know, when I walk by Tyler Myers, it's like, hey, he is a big player. When I stood beside Luke Shen when he was wearing shoes, like I was still bigger than Luke Shen. And obviously, I'm like 100 pounds heavier.
Can you play right shot, D?
I can. I'm a left shot guy. And hey, I'm a sniper. I would just add to the talented offensive wingers on the team. But what I'm getting to, let's get to the poll question here a little bit, as you probably put Sriracha right on the pork rinds as well. Our poll question brought to you by the great folks there at Atlas Goods, atlasgds.com. Use that promo code CC15. Just try them. Maybe one of the 142 people watching on YouTube, try them. You probably hate pork rinds because they come in the ones that come in the yellow bag, they're trash. These ones from Atlas GDS, they're excellent and they're live and fresh out of the air fryer. Our question: what is the training camp battle that you are most intrigued by? I put this up before the signing of Pius Suter. I wonder if the 3C conversation could have been one we could have dove into. The three options that I gave were third pairing left shot D, Martin versus Seelovs for the backup, or other, and I asked people to specify in the replies, which we'll get to in just a minute. But running away with the poll was third pairing left shot defenseman. 53% of people voted for that. Spencer Martin versus Seelovs, 27% of people said they were intrigued by that. 4% of people voted other, and then 15% of people said I'm angry. Let's get to some of the replies before we get your response here, Harm. We did have a bunch of replies. This one from Aaron Cassidy says, I honestly think Bluger versus Joshua. Joshua showed promise to move up the lineup, but Bluger seems like the established 3C. As we mentioned, this was a little bit before the Suter signing. Tim said Miller's wingers, which we kind of argued with a little bit before here with our top six. Bart Harley Jarvis says first line winger with Pettersson and Kuzmenko. Hey, that's something we argued about as well. So I feel like the replies are very good. And then Riles said, my boy Wolanin is going to be the third pairing lefty. Snell says there's no 3 LD battle. Hughes, Cole, Susie is the left side. Hronik, Myers, and Juleson / Wolanin / Irwin is the right side. What's the one that you're looking forward to the most this year for like an actual training camp battle? And I actually had a good conversation with this after we talked to Kevin Woodley yesterday on 650. I can't see a goalie battle being really won or lost. Like, I can't see it being won in training camp. I can only see it being lost. Like, Seelovs can play as good as you think at training camp, but he can't win a job.
I mean, he could.
Camp. I think it's more about Spencer losing the job. It's more about Martin losing the job. I think a goaltender can lose a job a lot easier than win a job at training camp.
Maybe, but it's also interesting how many times Alvin has straight off the bat said, I'm, like he said it at the end of the season, and he repeated it again on July 1st. In fact, Seelovs was his first name he mentioned when the idea of the backup situation was mentioned.
Good point.
That they're comfortable if he's ready to play in Vancouver, especially type of dominant World Championships performance that he had this summer. For me, it's a backup position because look, the third pair LD, like it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating, but I also feel like we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the backup role is more important than third line or third pair LD, because ultimately, especially given how up and down Demko has been health wise, like, man, we saw last year how much the second string goalie in that case Martin had to all of a sudden play a starter's workload.
Yeah.
Once Demko went down. So that's such a huge, important position. And you're also going to need that level of trust, because I don't want to see a scenario where Demko is playing, let's say, like 65 games just for the Canucks to get into the playoffs. Because let's say you get into the playoffs, but if Demko's gassed and he's not at his freshest, what's going to happen in the playoffs?
No, and we had a good conversation. We did a roundtable at Canucks Army and had this conversation. I found it interesting that there was only 13 goalies last year in the entire league who started 50 or more games. 50, not even like 62, like you just said. There was only 13 goalies, and I can see Thatcher Demko being one of the top 13 goalies in the league for starts easily. I can see him being over 50 for sure. But the 60 number it's almost like
if you can keep him below 60, that's amazing.
Yeah, every month that goes by in the offseason, I feel like I take a game off. And I'm at the point now where I'm at like 53, 50. Like I settled on like 52. That's what I thought for starts.
No. It's like if I had to set an over under, I'm not a betting guy, but just term everybody.
We'll get to the Betway bet in a minute.
It'd be 60. Like that's what I'm looking at.
Huh.
Because look, the head coach is going to ride. Like, he needs to win. He's going to ride the goaltender.
Yeah. So I'll make the point. I did mention 13 goalies were 50 or more. There was 7 NHL goalies last year who made 60 or more starts.
Yeah, especially
so
a team like the Canucks. Like, they're going to be right on the edge. Yeah. They're going to be on the margins, presumably, in terms of whether they're in or not. So they're probably going to be more.
And let's be serious about it. He's going to play so much at the end of the season that you almost have the first half of the year to establish who's going to be the backup for that final stretch when they're only playing a game or two.
But here's the thing. We've seen the Canucks starts.
True.
The Octobers and Novembers.
So maybe they play the wheels off them at the start. It's possible, but I do think that you're going to see, and Kevin Woodley brought this up, and I haven't really thought about this, but you can send Spencer Martin down at the start of the season, right? Like when you have when everybody sends their third string goalie down, he's probably not going to get picked up. Let's be honest. He's not going to, especially after the season he had last year, he's not going to get picked up on waivers. After that, and you might have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's 30 days after you're waiver eligible. So you have the first month to like move him up and down. Like after you send a player down, they're pretty much waivers exempt for the next 30 days after a quick call.
It starts once you call them up.
Yeah, so you'll get him down. Then when you call him up, you can ride with Seelovs for a little bit. And Woodley was saying not to write off the fact that Seelovs is the backup to start the season. And that because of his waiver flexibility from the start, you don't have to worry about it. And once you get the waiver flexibility from Martin, you can bounce him around if you want, or get Martin to just come up and be a backup for games where he's not playing, and then you get Seelovs down for like a week. Yeah. You can basically do it for a full, like I said, with that 30 days of waiver exempt time, you can have like a 30-day stretch of just playing the wheels off Seelovs in the AHL if he's getting rusty or if he's not getting enough games. So there are some more options than I think I've really thought about with the goaltending position, but let's not touch.
Thank God they're in Abbotsford rather than Utica. It opens up that flexibility.
Big time. Exactly. Without that, they would not be able to do this. So, good stuff there. I got some comments here about the sriracha I wanted to get to. Vince says mixed sriracha and ketchup.
Oh,
so
you can do that?
Your two favorite things. I mean,
that's smart.
I think that's good for like a burger.
Put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, you put a burger together there or anything like that. So I would go for that. So.
I have to give that a shot.
No, absolutely. I think they even have like spicy ketchup that is just like already pre-mixed. And we'll get to our poll question that we put up on the YouTube channel here. 28 votes. Who do you think won? You or me? Who had a better top 6?
Well, I got to bet on myself.
You got to bet on yourself.
Just like you have to bet on yourself.
I bet on myself, and I'll tell you what, we're both not right. We're both not wrong. 50-50.
Oh, really?
In the middle. So you and me, hey, people say how smart you are all the time. I just went 50-50 with you, so I don't know. We're in the same atmosphere, if you ask me, but not really. Damn it. Well, no, actually, I just pulled away. 52%. Call it right there. End it there, Aaron. All right, let's get to our Betway bet
fake
of the day. Yeah, cut it off. I'm voting. Oh, no, people are voting back for you. And it finishes 30 votes, 50-50, right down the middle. All right, let's get to our Betway bet of the day. We got the Blue Jays facing off against the Chicago Cubs, so we're going to rock with Jose Barrios. I'm going with him getting 8 or more strikeouts at plus 350. $10 bet's going to return you $45. You get that on Betway. Must be 19 plus to play and bet the responsible way. Just going with Barrios here because I feel like he's the type of guy who's going to step up after Alek Manoah got sent down to AAA today for the Blue Jays. And I'm going to say Barrios is the type of guy that I feel like he's a big energy guy. And I think after one of your boys gets sent down and there's still a lot of things to work on with Manoah, Barrios is going to go out there and just shove it today. Like I think he's going to try and silence some of the loudness around the team, and he's just going to shove it. So I'm going 8+ strikeouts at plus 350. $10 bet's going to return you 45. Must be 19.
Pitchers are just like goalies, in terms of the volatility.
Really is. It really is.
What other positions can you have a guy like? You're not going to have a franchise centerman, for example. Even in a down year, it's not like he's going to be so bad that it's like, oh, this guy's barely NHL caliber. But you can have that with goalies.
Oh, totally.
And you can obviously now how that was.
There was one like throughout my life, and listen, I played baseball at a pretty high level. I never got to professional ball or anything, but got a scholarship and all these things. And I was an okay pitcher up until when I was about 17, and then something just happened where I couldn't throw strikes at all anymore. Like and I never pitched after that. I pitched this one game where I walked like 9 batters in a row. It was a preseason game, so they actually just called the inning. I didn't even get 3 outs.
Oh wow.
It was embarrassing as hell. And I never pitched again. I never pitched in one game after that. So I just lost it after that. But that wraps it up for our Betway bets of the day. This weekend coming up here as we close out, I'm heading down to watch my boys, my BC Lions, playing tomorrow. So I'm excited for that. I'm going to get my my suit sized up for the wedding. Going to get our suits all set. The groomsmen, they're all coming over. We're going to the BC Lions on the weekend. So Harm, before we get out of here, you've already done so much this summer. What do you do for the next couple of weeks here? Because we're about a month away from heading out to Young Stars, which I'm very excited about. It's going to be a blast out there. And we're bringing golf clubs too. We're playing again, you and I. But what do you got left here the last little month? Any more plans? Because you're on vacation right now. I have to expect this weekend's got to be something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to be going out. I mean, I here's the thing. During the season, you end up with such little free time.
Yeah.
It's just, and I'm not complaining about it because I love what I do. And I like the fast pace, but you like, and whenever I do have precious little free time, I'm like, okay, I want to have a social life. So I'm going out and hanging out with friends, going to events, that sort of thing. So I get very little downtime to just like, oh, I got the evening and I'm just going to kick my feet up on the couch and do nothing. Right. So just more of a relaxed pace. I mean, a lot of reading books, watching movies, hanging out at the beach, again, going out, just living my best life.
I love that. I don't want to add
nothing big.
Let's close out on that. That's incredible
whatever
stuff.
Whatever I want to do.
Have you been to are you a Seas guy? I feel like, have you been to a Seas game?
I've
like,
been to,
the experience this
I
summer?
went to 3 games last summer and yeah, so like that's great
Those
example. I've been to one.
Thinking,
I haven't been to one this year, so gotta head up one.
Yeah, I was looking at it yesterday because I was like, I could double header the Lions into the Seas because Lions are at 4, Seas are at 7. So we'll see what happens. But I'll be at the Lions game. If you're going to the Lions game, look for me. I'll be covered in all orange and I'll be walking around with a claw in one hand, beer in the other, and then of course, I'm a mega fan. Like I am a mega fan of the Lions.
Oh
I
my
even
God.
I got my BC Lions big old chain here.
Oh, you have to rock that.
And I rock this every time. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's my thing. I'm a big Lions fan. I love those games. I think they're doing a great job. I mean, the fact that I live right beside the arena or beside the stadium makes it like really easy for me to go because like it's cheap tickets, really good time. Nothing flows like a BC place beer. I always say that. So I'm excited. If you're at the Lions game tomorrow, look for me. And yeah, that's it. We'll wrap it up on that note. Shout out to Aaron Bordato, our producer, done a great job over there. Quads will be back next week. I believe I will as well. But then I think down the road, we'll get you and Quads to do an episode. I'll be sitting over in the couch. You guys can come do it here. But that wraps up here for my co-host, Harman, Dayal, our producer, Aaron, over there at Oilers Nation HQ. My name is Chris Faber. And thank you to the Vancouver Canucks for giving us news right before the show. And thank you to you, the 100+ listeners that we've had from start to finish here live on YouTube, and the thousands of people who will be listening to this on podcast as well. This has been another episode of the Canucks Conversation.
Thanks for listening to Canucks Conversation. Hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.
How about keep it to a thank you, Jim?